So what I have right here is a preliminary version of the JEST open source JavaScript engine for your games, which replicates Graal in a sense, but of course, this is not designed for Graal. This is designed for your own custom games. And so, if you want to have a game that is built with 16 by 16 tiles, this is already recalibrated for that purpose. But you can also modify it and customize it and use it for something like 14 by 14 tiles, which is unheard of and you shouldn't do that, but hey, you could. Or 8 by 8 tiles, or if you were wanting to do 32 by 32 tiles, which I hate, but it's still, some industry standards for looser projects that I would say are probably not entirely mainstream. You can do that too. So what I recommend is go ahead and check out the repository that I have going on here. So this is version 0.2 of the JEST engine. I've made a video before. I know that Rice2K kind of discussed it or shouted it out, I believe. That was not really the best version of an engine, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it. I guess I'm just at a point where I'm not sure that I want to keep the engine closed source because it's just getting too much for me to deal with. There's a lot that goes into having an engine that's closed source. Then nobody gets to really benefit from it. You have to run it yourself. And then you have to develop all of these assets for it. Then you have to start up this community, build your community, and get the whole graphics behind it, which I still plan to do, but I can still do that and just have a separate game project that's running the same engine. I would like to release this open source, and so that is what I'm doing. So version 0.1, I've reopened it to the public. You can access that. If you've seen my other video, I think it was a year ago, version 0.1 was available, and I would recommend upgrading to just 0.2. So I think a few people downloaded 0.1. I would definitely recommend getting off 0.1 and switch over to 0.2. So 0.2 is now available, and this is much, 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 much better and much higher quality. So what I'm doing in this version, there's a number of changes, a bunch of changes that I can't even mention because there's just so many. I really wanted to start gutting it out and getting it to a place that it was actually extremely simplified, working properly, running with a web server so that you can have an online mode, and also building a preliminary account system along with having it plugged into Electron so that you can have it as a downloadable application, and you can also have it as a mobile application. So all of those are features that come wrapped up in this pre-made. You're just going to have to kind of figure out how to wrap it up into Electron yourself, although I've already provided you the files. So if you're looking through here, you should be able to see some of the files already. Now, one of the other differences that I would recommend you looking into is there is now a level editor and also a animator. So if you wanted to do something like the GANI system that you see in Graal, the GANI file type, you can also do that in this open source application. There is a program called, if I look in, let me just open up in the code, because I'm getting a little bit lost here. There's just so many changes, so I apologize for the scattered. But anyways, if you're looking in the root JavaScript folder, you can go into apps, and there you're going to find the JEST apps, because this is primarily focused on the JEST. In the future, if there were going to be plugins and other applications that people created within the framework, that would probably have a separate folder for companies or brands or individuals who wanted to have their separate libraries. That's perfectly acceptable. But for now, everything's centralized under JEST, and so you can have the main JEST application here as your launching point, and there's a lot of things in here that need to be, I guess, maybe kind of modified by you. I'm not going to go too deep into that just yet, but some of this stuff has been simplified. So you can customize some icons for your little app, and you can also, down here, start editing some of your file types. So if you wanted to add new file types, that are going to be handled by your game engine. You can just kind of hard code them in here. Ideally, in the future, they'll be handled, I guess, through a CMS, a content management system. Now, I do have my own content management system that I've created in PHP and JavaScript. I've got several of them. One isn't finished, but one is actually usable. And so it's something I created a long time ago. The one that I was revamping is going to be a lot better, but I just don't think I'm going to get around to finishing that. So I do have a previous CMS that I can use. You can even create your own. You could probably even doctor up Drupal or some other CMS like, WordPress. I wouldn't recommend WordPress, but if you have Drupal, you could do it in WordPress. You can do it in anything. Calibrate it so that you can have your own tables and different forms that are manageable by logged in users via the browser, and you can have them manage these file types and then download them directly into the software. So that's not entirely implemented yet, and so even though that's something that can be done, you would want to fork the GitHub open source here and implement that yourself. That's perfectly fine. I don't mind people adding to the engine in order to help, facilitate some of those higher end editing capabilities and management. So I would go ahead and just kind of doctor that up in probably Drupal or something, and then just tweak these files and make sure that you're running your own folder, like I said here. So if you're in apps, you could probably run your own folder just, to generically start and get it plugged into those different files. Now, you can include different files now, and the way that those are being handled is through the root directory. If you're looking at load_order.txt, you're going to see here that there is a list of files now, and this is being handled just like, a generic quote-unquote htaccess file, but it's not really. And so anyways, what you can do is you can add comments using the $, and you can also just add your files and organize them into any, way that you want, and add notes, little developer notes. And then you can go ahead, and the next step is take this build_js bundle.python script that's written here, and you can run this, and what you are going to get out of that is it's going to load up the index PHP file and the index sandbox file, and it's going to pull in that load order of all of these files, your JS files, whatever else it's going to be, your CSS, and it's going to begin compiling them into a bundle. And so you can have a minified bundle, and you can have the raw bundle of code. Why is this? You ever notice like these like low battery things just bother you when you're in the middle of something? It's just, I apologize for this unprofessional interruption, but apparently you can't just make a video in peace without pop-ups and updates constantly in your face these days. Oh, God, I'm just so sick of it. And I don't want to edit this video. I just wanted to get it out there. But of course, now there's pop-ups and shit on fucking Mac and on Windows. I recommend switching to fucking Mac. So all this stuff has been built on Mac. I would highly recommend, if you're on Windows, get the fuck off of Windows and switch over to Mac, because there's a lot less. I know that like Windows these days, there's a lot of spyware and endless updates you can't turn off and stuff. At least on Mac you can turn those off. So I'm running this all on, a Mac, and I do plan to release a version for C++, which I've shown in my other videos, and that was also compiled using Mac. So that's on, I think, the 64-bit, and the binaries are for Mac. So I can release that soon too. You're just going to want to switch it over to Windows and make the tweaks to make it work for your Windows if you're running on Windows. And so also, the same thing with Electron here. You're probably going to want to read up on Electron and make sure that there's not additional things that you need to do to get it running on Windows. But you can compile this for Electron, and that's another big thing that this file right here, which is the build JavaScript bundle Python script, is going to help with. So what that's going to do is it's going to take all the files and it's going to compile them into your bundle. and then it's going to render them out into the index files for you so that you can just swiftly load up your index files. I'm not sure exactly which file I have been using by default. I think it's index.html, but there's a number of alternatives here I've provided in case you wanted to, quickly do different tangents of your index. And so there's one that's, pulling in the minified bundle and various things like that. So the sandbox one is going to be, and it looks like there's some bugs in it, but I'm not too worried about that right now because this is just kind of your sandbox environment. So that needs some love and some tenderness. But this right here is going to be your root index file. And so you can pull this in. You can see what it's done is that Python script has taken all those files and it has included them. And so from there, you can just run the file and it's going to load up your environment. Ideally, you would be running the minified version so that everything's loaded via a single script. So you've got, the CSS and the bundle.min.js. So that's going to have everything just in one file, and it's going to not have so many HTTP requests whenever people are accessing the index. So I would recommend using the minified version, and this also is going to save you some of the hassle. But I kind of separated this out because if you're in the middle of handling things and there's errors in the code, sometimes having minified JavaScript or minified CSS can break if you're in the middle of development and there's errors in some of your files. So that's what this exists for. You've got this here if you wanted to run your environment and develop locally, and I recommend developing locally. You can have all of the files separated, and so you can find out where your errors are at, and you can debug it so much more easier. But the minified version, this is probably the one that you're going to upload directly to your server. But anyways, so let's go ahead and dig a little bit deeper here. Yeah, you can now start adding new files for your applications in the load order, and make sure you run your Python script to compile that. The next thing is, this is again the root for the application. You don't really need to do anything there. All of this is being handled directly through the embed folder. So if you go into js/embed, you have embed.js. In here, I already have 3 applications lined up. You can just comment them out. So if you wanted to play the game, you can load the player by commenting out this application code, and this will just load up the JEST play application. Or if you wanted to do the level editor, then you would have the JEST tiler, and then you're going to obviously just refresh your page. And so the JEST tiler application I've shown in my other video, it is the level editor. The level editor is pretty rich and abundant. It's got connection to the account system. So there's kind of like a preliminary account system. Again, this is just the JEST engine for JavaScript 0.2. So we are on version 0.2. We are still in beta. And unlike Grawl, we're not going to release at 1.0 and then roll back and pretend that we're still in beta. We are technically in beta. We're still in beta. It's labeled as beta. So keep that in mind, guys. But there's a lot you can do with it. And if you're going to want to start building your games with this, you can. But you're going to want to put some stuff into it. This is a massive starting point. I know that it takes so much to create your own game engine, guys. I have decades of experience. I've worked in games since I was a child. I know what it takes, and I know how much a lot of you guys need your own game engine. So I am going to help lift that burden for you guys and help your spirit soar here. So go ahead and you can download this, and it's going to make your life easier. So yeah, we are still in beta mode, but this is still usable, and you can customize it if you wanted to take the beta mode and turn it into an advanced version. Just by all means, make sure that you credit me. That is the only thing that I require of you, is to credit the JEST author, credit Antago. This is where you got it from. This is the foundation of your software, but it is open source. I would also, if you're not familiar yet, I do have a message board called mongers.net, and this is just a tribute because I had an old mongers.net back in the day for when I started the open source movement in Graal, and I'm going to open up a forum on there for the JEST Game Engine developments and coding. So go join mongers.net, create an account, and we can discuss game development and the engine code directly in the forums. If you guys want to start creating your own, I don't know, documented commentary or wiki for the engine itself, I would definitely recommend that you do that, and I appreciate anything that anybody wants to contribute. But let's centralize some of that discussion on mongers.net and also the Discord server. So check the description below. Anyways, moving back into the software itself, this Tyler application is the level editor, and it is pre-equipped with the ability to sync your files to the cloud. Again, we're still in beta mode, but it does work, and there is a preliminary account system that I have in place, and that is being ran through PHP. So if you go into your root here, you're going to see a PHP folder. So the JEST Tyler is going to prompt you to log in, and that login system is being handled through here, through these files. So you've got your authentication, you've got various components and stuff for these files. And then you've got your include for the utility. And this is just a very, very super lightweight, generic beginning of a quote unquote included CMS. I don't want to use the word CMS just so generically here because I recommend having external content management systems as well so that you can plug in your game engine to those and manage your content outside of it. But there is also this lightweight included JEST CMS for the game engine itself. And this is going to have, your config file. It's going to have the client itself that pulls up, and starts this quote unquote lightweight CMS. And then everything can just be pulled in through your includes and the generic index starting point. But from all of these files, if you wanted to customize them, it does have a connection to MySQL, and you can authenticate an account system. So you can authenticate the account username and the password, and that gets sent back into the game engine itself. So back into the embed file, the Tyler is already a working sample using this lightweight, internalized JEST Game Engine CMS built inside of PHP that connects to MySQL. The JEST Tyler allows you to log into those accounts, and you'll see the username up in the corner, and you can also sync data to the cloud. So that's a new feature in 0.2 is syncing quote unquote data to the cloud, which is your account system. The next thing that we have is the animator. So this is something that you've seen in my other video as well. And the animator is basically the Gani animation editor that Graal has, but we're transitioning it over into our own custom animation files. So if you wanted to modify the way that those files are parsed, you can do that very, very easily. And you can also rename the file so that it doesn't have to be called .jani. So I renamed it from Gani to Jani. So JANI is the JEST animator file structure that's being used to save your coded animations and parsing them and turning them into usable animations that are being rendered inside of the engine. And so the JEST animator is where you create your animations. This is the application. And so you can find all of that up in the apps folder. So inside of the JEST library, you'll see that I have something called clients. And so this is where the Tyler is located. And these are extending JEST. And so if you look at the top here, you can see what they're doing is these new game engine creator applications, they first extend JEST creator, and then JEST creator extends JEST, which is, again, that root application file I was talking about. And again, that's where you're going to register file types and things. But there's also a lot more going on in this version. So if you're going into the JEST tiler, so this is going to be, the level editor application, and that's the core of it, and the same for the animator. And then the JEST play, this is where you're going to be able to play the game, so you can play the different files that you've created using the JEST tiler and the JEST animator. Now, these can be run through the browser. I highly recommend wrapping it in Electron because there's more stable save as commands. I haven't really tested out the save as for Electron recently because I've just done so much development. So it should still be working. If it's not, it's just a matter of just solving those issues. The point is getting this open source and getting it out there so that people can use it. And all of the features are in there. If there's something that needs fixed, obviously, this is beta software. And there's so much files here that please download it and make sure that you're getting plugged in to the initial JavaScript version, because there is a C++ version as well. And the C++ version also now has like a heavy GUI, customized GUI capability. And the GUI for the JavaScript is also being evolved in this version, which is 0.2. And so if you're looking in your components folder from the JEST library, right below clients, there's going to be a bunch of base class files. So you've got, something that kind of helps organize things for the play mode, where you've got, the JEST user, a JEST guest, which is going to be somebody from the server who is joined the server, and the JEST human, which is going to be one of the base classes of the JEST user and guest, the JEST player, all that kinds of stuff. So if you go into parse here, you can find different parsers for parsing different file types, which is very important. This is the new online folder that I was telling you about. So this connects to a WebSocket. There's now a class called WebSocket. So that's going to be located, I believe, down here in, is it Media Core? No. Where is that? I don't even know where I stuck it. This was so long ago. This is why I'm releasing this open source, is because I've taken a big break from the JavaScript version, that it just makes sense to make this open source. So let me just search for it. If you can't find anything, I highly recommend just downloading Pulsar if you don't have Pulsar already. It's such a incredible text editor. So make sure you're using Pulsar if you haven't already. It's the reincarnation of Atom. I believe that, was it Microsoft or somebody had taken over Atom? And so the crew who created Atom text editor is now creating Pulsar. So Pulsar is what I'm using here. So I'm just going to search for JEST WebSocket. And this is going to quickly just tell me where my file is. Okay, there it is. So if you look in JS System Data Server WebSocket. Ideally, this probably should have been organized into the Media Core folder, and I'm open to recommendations for better organization, but this is pretty organized quite well. So if you go into System here, you can see that there's a bunch of different folders, and one of those is data. So if you open up the WebSocket folder, it's the server folder, you can see the WebSocket allows you to connect to a Node.js server. I do have that file. You can contact me. Maybe I'll put it on the mongers.net forums. You can just download it directly, or I'll slip it into the README in the GitHub. But I would also highly recommend customizing your own Node.js server, because the one that I have is really just a generic working base. But you can have your own, and you can also create your own GUI to manage your server. So I know a lot of you are really big into creating, your own custom GUIs and control panels. Go ahead and, create your own by all means. I do have a base server. And so that's what this is automatically being plugged into. And if you go into the online file again, you can see that it's using the JEST WebSocket class. And that really simplifies a lot of different, server messages. And so by registering different events to some of these built-in features of the WebSocket class, you can just go ahead and say, when the WebSocket sends a message for the initialization of when it starts, call this method here, this interior method. When it sends a message for when a guest joins, call the guest join method within the online class. And so if you're looking in the JEST online class that I have here, you can see I have different methods that just handle those events. So this is a very simple way to just interact with the built-in WebSocket that I've created. And a lot of those events, like I said, some of that stuff is being preliminarily defined within this node.js server that I've coded. So you're probably gonna want me to get a hold of that. So join the Discord server, join the forums, and reach out to me to get that. But anyways, that is where that's being handled, is the WebSocket is already interacting with that Node.js server, and then it's sending out these messages. And these messages are then being intercepted by my online class, and then I can just define what I want to happen when those messages are being prompted. So the JEST online class is really just a wrapper for my WebSocket, and I get to tell it what happens when different events are taking place within my game engine. And so that's new. There's, various classes for, I guess, this preliminary cloud, like I said. So if you wanted to synchronize data to your MySQL database, you can call it through the JEST cloud. There's a bunch of different functions in here for that. So look this, up and just crack it open and give it a quick breeze through to figure out what the cloud is doing. And the same thing with the JEST login. So this is where this is connecting to that light PHP CMS that's already built into JEST 0.2. So anyways, moving on from that, there is also a new revamp of the image handling system. So previously, images were handled through this JEST gallery, which is so, I don't know. I'm deprecating it. Let's just say that. It's not ideal. It was a novel idea. If somebody wants to repurpose it for something else, by all means, do that. I don't care. But I don't like it. I don't like this. And so what I wanted to do was make file downloading and parsing and instantiating that into usable system objects like graphics or JANI files or sounds into something that was more universally identical across all of the different file types. And so I created within this file folder here a new thing called the JEST file loader and the JEST file reader. And so the file reader is going to allow you to read files from the computer, and then the JEST file loader is going to let you download files from the web server. And so some of those methods included inside of here is like the load file if you just want to load one file. And this is all asynchronous. And if you wanted to load multiple files, you can throw in multiple addresses. And then the JEST imager is replacing JEST gallery, and what this does is it just simply extends the JEST file loader class. And so within the JEST file class, or the JEST file loader, the JEST imager JEST file class, there's a definition at the top where you just simply specify the file types that you're going to be handling here. So we've got GIF and we've got PNG. And then this is just going to tell you what file type, quote unquote, that you're wrapping this data in. So if you wanted to have something that's an image and you want that image to be recognized within your game engine, you'll just create a class for it. So let's say, I have images and I just want them to be known as graphics within the JEST game engine. So I create like this new JEST file class for JEST graphic. And this extends, just kind of this loose class here called JEST savable. And this is very, very kind of deceptive of a file name. It exists, but in the future that needs to be much more expanded upon because I want it to just be a generic base class for classes that might have quote unquote savable data. But there's not a whole lot going on with JEST savable just yet. But this is kind of a starting point to getting you plugged into a bunch of other classes that has, some generic properties that are going to allow it to be universally maneuvered and manipulated between, different aspects of the game engine. So Jest Graphic just extends, this generic class. And within here, you can have like your different functions and stuff for it. You can have your render function, you can have your draw function. You can just do whatever you want with it. And so the idea is I want to, let's say, handle the object URL, which is what JavaScript does for image blobs. And I want to take that data and pre-render it and draw it onto a canvas so that I can grab that data from the DOM canvas. I can do that. I can handle all this stuff, and I can attach all this data to my Jest image data. So if you're taking image data from the server, like a PNG file, you can include a wrapper class called Jest Graphic, and you can add all this stuff that you want to be universally associated with all of the image files that you are downloading from the server. And then those images are handled through your graphic class. So that's what I'm doing here is I'm just wrapping images inside of this class. That way, all of my images have different functions attached to them, and their data is already pre-rendered onto canvases, and I can just grab that image data from the canvas and manipulate it immediately. So from that, the imager then says, all of my images are just going to be wrapped inside a Jest Graphic. So that's, the file class. And this is overloaded from Jest File Loader. So if you look in Jest File Loader, you can see that it's telling you that you want to override, or not overload, sorry, override. You want to override this method and then return the class type so that it's validated. So this is just part of the Jest File Loader class. And then down here, you're going to also implement this method in all of your Jest File Loader classes, and then this is going to take whatever data is being pulled from the secretary. So the secretary is going to handle your file downloads and reads and things like that, and then it's going to parse it like I showed you previously inside of this Jest folder here, or file here. You're going to define your file types in the Jest class. So this, again, might be something better wrapped inside of a CMS, but just, look at this very simply. We tell the secretary that we want to recognize a PNG file type, and then we tell it the subpath that images for PNG file types are going to be stored, and it's just going to be called images. And then we tell it the extension name, the parse type, what the parser is going to be, and the response type. So we're going to download a blob data. We're going to, quote unquote, parse it into a blob. And then we're going to use the image parser. So if we looked at that image parsing thing in my parse folder I showed earlier, we have Jest parser image. And you can see Jest parser image is just taking the data and returning it wrapped as a blob, basically. And so we just have that blob data. And then in here, because this is a Jest file loader, if you're using the methods inside of this class that the Jest imager extends, it's whenever a new file gets downloaded, it's going to call this function here to create a file object for it and store it inside of the system. And so the Jest imager is going to call this and store it inside of its files list. And when it gets called, it's going to send the record. And that record's going to have that blob data attached to it. And then there's going to be, some file info, which is the file system info. It's going to have the address to the file, and whether it was local or remote is going to be the argument for network. And then we take that, and then it creates a file called, whatever you want to call it. It's going to, it's the file name. And then it's going to wrap all that inside of the Jest Graphic class that I was just explaining to you. So now we have Jest Graphic, and it's going to tell you that it came from the client that created the imager object. And so we take, this dot client and tell it that it's part of this, application. And then we use the file name from the file info, and we just pass the address and the network to it because I added those as arguments in my constructor there. And then I just set my file up because I created a method for setting, up my graphic inside of the JEST graphic class. And then I render it. And I pass that blob data to this new graphic, and it's going to render the blob data. And that blob data, once it's rendered inside of JEST graphic, you see that it takes blob as an argument, and then it'll validate it, store some stuff, do some checks, and then ultimately what it does is it creates an element image, which is a wrapper for image elements in JavaScript. And then from there, it's going to store that as this .file. And then I'll register an event for when the image is, successfully loaded so that I know when the image is ready. And then it will draw it. So in the event that it draws it immediately, that the data is already quickly ready, which usually it's not, I'm going to draw that data onto this internal canvas that I was talking about immediately. And if not, if it's not ready, well, then I have this little event here, which when the image is ready, it'll make it draw it when it's ready. So this is just a fail-safe right here. And so when it goes into draw, you'll see it's going to pull up that canvas, and it's going to copy the image from the file onto the canvas. So now I have this graphic that takes that image data and has it stored onto a canvas and lets you know when it's ready, and you can manipulate your image. But all of that is very swiftly done because now I just have this JEST imager that extends JEST file loader. So you can do that for any file type. So this is working for GIF and PNG, but let's say you wanted to do it for the JANI file. So I revamped the Fantascope from version 0.1 of the JEST JavaScript game engine, and I tell it the same thing that I told my JEST imager, right? So my JEST imager was a few recognized methods because this is extending JEST file loader. So just super, super fucking easy now, man. By extending the JEST file loader, they all have the same setup. So I take JEST Fantascope, I say my file type is JANI instead of PNG or GIF, and then I tell it, again, in that file class method, that my wrapper for JANI files is JEST JANI, and then I created that wrapper here. So here's the wrapper for JEST JANI files. And so this takes the JANI data that was parsed, and it turns it into a JEST JANI object, and this allows me to manipulate my JANI data however I want to. And so anyways, the JEST Fantascope is going to allow me to download the data from the server or the computer, the local computer. And then again, it calls create file object when it's ready, takes the secretary record from that data, file information, the address, the network, whether it was local or remote. And then I just do the same thing that I did before. I set up a wrapper object, the JEST JANI, for that JANI file data. So now this creates a JEST JANI using the data that was downloaded. And you can see it's however you want to wrap it and handle that data, but this is going to give you swift access to any file type that's being downloaded. So from there, I'm going to just, set up my JEST JANI object, and then I'm going to tell it the animation and pass it the data from the secretary. And inside of here, I go down to the set animation, and all it does is set that data as the animation. And that data is already internally parsed because I have outlined earlier for the secretary that JANI files are handled like this, and they're stored in the JANIs folder. And they're parsed as text, just raw text. And so the other thing that happens there is, even though it's parsed as raw text, it's then internally parsed by the Janny parser. And so before this ever hits my Fantascope Jest file loader, finishing method where it creates the object, the secretary is going to load all that data. It's going to validate it and pull it from this path. It's going to load it as text data, and then it's going to pass it to the Janny parser, which is inside of, again, this parse folder here. See here? File, game, blah, 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 down to P, parse. Jest parser Janny. Just the same as where my image was. Jest parser image. Jest parser PNG. So I think that Jest parser image is, I'm not sure if I'm using this or PNG. It's whatever you want. You can create your own parser for anything and just define it when you set up your secretary file types. But anyways, so yeah, let's pull that up. The Jest parser Janny, what this does is it takes all of this data from the Janny file and it parses it. Now, some of this stuff is kind of being pulled from various places. It's a little more complicated because I do have like a new folder for storing different aspects of some of your tools, and you kind of just helps you to separate it. So I'm not going to go too deep into that just yet, but you can see that like up here, I created a plugins folder inside of the clients folder. And so for things that are like, Janny parsing, you can split up the different aspects of the parsing process. So you've got your attributes, the options, the sprite, all that stuff is being, handled separately here. And I just did that because the Janny parser needs to be more advanced and it needs to be better organized. And I like being able to have all this stuff centralized as a plugin. But things like, PNG and image stuff, this stuff is a little more straightforward. But anyways, this is going to parse that Janny data, and it's going to store it back in the secretary. And again, right back through the file loader, this is going to grab that secretary result when it's ready, and it's going to pass it back to the Fantascope, which the Fantascope is called that download in the first place, and they'll just create the file object automatically and wrap it as a Jest Janny object, which is right here. So all that data that gets parsed is then wrapped as a Jest Janny, and I can do whatever I want with it in here. Because my Fantascope just takes that wrap data and just pushes it inside of a Jest Janny object and wraps it. So you can do that with anything now. It's very, very straightforward, like I said. Everything's very streamlined now. And so with this new Jest file loader class, that makes downloading files and parsing them and then wrapping them a breeze, and they get stored inside of whatever class extends the Jest file loader. So the Jest Fantascope is just simply for downloading Janny files, and then it wraps them as Jest Janny objects. Same thing with the image. But anyways, I'm going to move on from that. So long story short, there's a lot more new features in this version 0.2. And it is now for open source. You can find it on GitHub. So go ahead and check out that GitHub. I'll put the link in the description below. But anyways, yeah, I'm going to sign off here. I highly recommend downloading it. I'm going to, try to keep making this more open source and pushing it forward. I had to take the other one down for a minute because I just felt like it wasn't ready. But 0.1 version is still up. I made it public again, but version 0.2 is now out, and that is the latest version, and it has a lot more capability, and it's much more modular. So this is the one I'm talking about, and this now has the level editor and creator, and also your animation creator and editor. So you can run all of this locally on your computer, and you can edit the back end, you can advance your game engine, and you can plug it into a server. There's an online mode that needs a lot of love, but it's in there And it's super, super easy to evolve it because I made it very modular and I made it very simple. So it does connect to a server and it does load extra players and adds them in there. However you want to build and expand upon that, it's up to you because I've already laid the groundwork for you. And when I say that it's clean, I mean it's clean. It's very clean. But anyways, so yeah, this is version 0.2. You please download it, follow my GitHub, share the link, share the video, and join the Mogners.net message board and join the Discord server. I am going to sign off here. And the next one that I'd like to release is the C++ version, which I've shown you in a video before. I'd like to release the C++ JEST version. It's a mirror of this. So it's not exactly identical because of C++, and I've also kind of gave it better naming conventions because naming conventions with C++ and naming conventions with JavaScript are just a little bit different. So with JavaScript, I didn't want there to be naming conflicts, so I just prepended the word jest in front of all of the classes just so that it's a little bit safer. But when it comes to C++, there's a lot less room for conflicts. And so most of the stuff in C++ is not entirely like that because C++ is a lot of it's, done through direct includes. Whereas with JavaScript, everything's basically global. It's all global. So they're basically named the same thing as the C++ version, but they're simplified. They don't have the word jest in front of them, so, you don't have to worry about name conflicts in C++ as much as you do with JavaScript. But anyways, yeah, and the C++ version also is now working with the online mode, and it's not probably going to have the level editor or the animation editor, probably because I just don't think it needs to be. So those are probably going to stay here in the JavaScript version. So get used to those in here. So your level editor and your animation editor, your creator, game engine software, you're going to just do that in JavaScript and you can expand upon it and customize it. I've shown you the level editor and the animation editor before. They're very powerful. But that's probably going to stay inside of JavaScript. Like I said, there is a user interface folder for a bunch of different, elements that allows you to handle things like, text input, file select, a number range field, a text area field, all that stuff is going to be inside of the UI folder here. So the UI can be expanded upon, but that's been built into version 0.2. And again, that's being heavily used inside of the creation software. So yeah, a lot of that stuff is just going to stay here. It's going to stay inside of JavaScript. I don't really want to port that over to C++ because I don't think it needs it. As long as we can wrap our JavaScript inside of Electron, we can still save and open files locally. We can do a lot of the stuff we can do with C++. We can just do it inside of Electron. And I think that Pulsar might be using Electron too. And is Discord using Electron? So there's a lot of stuff that is just native software that is running inside of Electron or Electron-esque wrappers that you would never know. It's really just a JavaScript application. So we don't really need it to be inside of C++. So definitely start getting used to it inside of the JavaScript here because this is now available for download in version 0.2 on the GitHub open source.